although this one could be initiated by, I don't know if it makes sense to go to arbitration on that matter, but that split is possible. Okay. Let's go to the third case. This is from Germany, 1970. Does this court say that the arbitration agreement is always separate? Or in other words, whether or not it should be considered separate is a question of what? What is the question that they like to ask?
Whether it's an independent arbitration clause.
Yes, so what question would they ask to determine whether the arbitration contract is independent or not?
The party's intent.
The party's intent. The party's intent is a tricky one in this case. Is it that, listen to this question. Would they ask the question that would the parties have entered into an arbitration agreement without the underlying agreement? Is that the right question to ask? Why? If it's not the right question to ask, the court actually gives a response to that. Why isn't that the right question to ask? The question again is, would the parties have entered into an arbitration agreement without the underlying contract? That is not the right question to ask. Why is that not the right question to ask? Huh?
Nonsense. Nonsense.
It's nonsensical. That's what they say. Why? Why?
Because the answer will always be negative.
Exactly. Because the answer will always be no. Right? Nobody enters into an arbitration agreement without an underlying contract. What are you arbitrating about? So that, they say, is exactly the wrong question to ask. Instead, the right question to ask would be what? What is the right question to ask?
Whether the parties agree that a tribunal should not only decide the arising from the by the main contract, but also validity of the main contract.
Exactly. So it's a question of intent, right? Whether the parties have actually intended this particular result. Whether the parties have actually intended that there is a separate arbitration agreement. Whether or not they have intended the arbitration tribunal to decide the validity of the arbitration agreement itself. So that is the right question to ask. And the answer to that obviously depends on
party's intent.
The party's intent, and the court would have to do a factual inquiry into the state of mind of the parties when they actually concluded, and that would, of course, require the presentation of a full-fledged hearing on. We will talk about how that is split between courts and the arbitral tribunal, but basically the question that they're invited is, and the court actually, if you look at page 195, the third full paragraph, it talks about ambiguity of intentions, right? There are two types of arbitration agreements according to this court. One possibility is there is an unambiguous intention of the parties to this effect. How should that ambiguity be resolved according to this court? There's always that ambiguity, not always, but in many cases there is that ambiguity about whether or not the parties have actually intended that result. And what is the court's preferred position on how to resolve that kind of ambiguity? Take a look at 197, second paragraph, second full paragraph.
So the court is presumption.
Excellent.
Decide the separability arbitration.
Yes. So the way they resolve the dispute or this ambiguity is by resorting this principle of presumptive separability. So reasonable business people are presumed to have intended, if they include an arbitration clause in the agreement, they are presumed to have intended that it be independent and it be decided by the arbitral tribunal, and that is the dispute resolution mechanism that they've selected. So if it's not very clear, if there is some ambiguity about what the parties have intended, then we resort to this presumption of separability and of validity. Separability. That's how they resolve the dilemma. So the question to ask is, did the parties intend? And if the answer is not very clear, and there's some ambiguity, then you resort to this presumption of intention, because according to the court, reasonable business people are presumed to have actually intended that to occur. Because if you sign an arbitration agreement and the intention is not very clear, you're not presumed that you wanted to have a split jurisdiction between the court and the arbitral tribunal. You probably intended that the same people decide the underlying contract as well as the validity of the arbitration contract. So it's a presumption-based resolution of the problem. The fourth case, the facts of this case are actually very fascinating. Tell me what happened. The SNE case. Or the facts of this case. It's simple to understand. What happened? Well, what gave rise to the dispute?
Oil or payment to SA.
Or shipments.
100 million.
$100 million. How did that happen?
Because he took the delivery of the shipment
And-
without paying.
Exactly. Isn't it interesting that you would actually ship $100 million worth of goods without getting paid to what kind of company?
Or company.
Huh? Where's that company incorporated?
Moscow.
Bermuda. There's this Bermudian company that somehow convinced these guys in the former Soviet Union to ship $100 million worth of oil, and they sent the oil. This guy kept the money and the oil, right? Of course, they had to find a way to get it. How does that happen? Do you know ordinarily when you do business with someone you don't know in international trade, in international transactions, have you taken IBT, International Business Transactions? Some of you did. So what do you do when to prevent basically something like this? What in a regular course of business, what do people do? Huh?
Get money first.
What did you say? Exactly. That's what you do. You issue a letter of credit, LC. So there's the shipment. This is the ship owner, right? So there's the bill of lading. This guy, the buyer, issues this letter of credit. And there's the buyer's bank here. And there's the seller's bank and the buyer's bank. These guys know each other. These two, the buyer and the seller, they don't know each other. Right? So what happens is as soon as this is delivered to this guy, there is a document issued to this guy. This would be taken here and he gets paid before this thing actually reaches there. If there's a problem with payment, then they would know before this thing is actually delivered. Sometimes this guy or this guy has lien on this thing. But there is a mechanism, a bank payment, to make sure that you don't actually deliver items without getting paid. So this is what they do. In this case, I don't know what happened. In the first place, when it is a Bermuda company, that's where now a lot of share companies are incorporated, right? Suspicious. But I don't know, these guys might have known each other for a long time, but this one, in this particular instance, what happened was they took the oil and refused to pay. It's $100 million. So, the contract for the sale of the goods contained an arbitration agreement. Right? Who wanted to go to arbitration? The Bermudian party or the Soviet party? Why? Exactly. Because the tribunal was supposed to be in Moscow. Right? And they didn't go there. And the opinion that we have is from that tribunal. And the Bermudian guys did not just, disappear. They actually came and litigated, right? Or arbitrate the case, and they had the capacity to do that. What was their objection? They make a very interesting objection, right? To the jurisdiction of the tribunal. What did they say?
They say the main contract is void and the arbitration clause is also void.
Why?
Because the main contract is not exercised by two not authorized representative, and there is no sign on it.
Under what law?
According to the Soviet law.
Yes.
So
Look,
Union of Soviet.
the argument is very simple. So again, this is what we have. Under Soviet law, the applicable Soviet contracts law, any contract that is not signed and that is not attested by 2 or 3 witnesses. 2 witnesses, huh? That's 3? I don't remember. 2 or 2, right? Okay. That's not attested by 2 witnesses is invalid. And these guys said, after taking delivery of $500 million worth of goods, and they say, oh, the contract was not signed by 2 witnesses, and under Soviet law it's invalid. And if the underlying contract is invalid, the arbitration contract is also invalid. Because it fails to meet formal requirements. How does the principle of separability alter the result in this case? Does the court say that this law does not apply? Does it? It does not say that. It recognizes, or not the court actually, the tribunal, they do recognize that this Soviet law of contract that requires 2 attestation of 2 witnesses, it does apply. But does it apply to the whole thing? Or does it only apply to the end of the contract? That is a part of what we're saying, right? Yes, we understand that this law exists. However, its applicability is limited to the underlying contract. So they separate the arbitration agreement, they take it outside of that, and they subject it to what? Huh?
New Convention.
Yes. They actually say that the arbitration contract is subject to the New York Convention. It's not even subject to Soviet law of that particular contract, law of the Soviet Union. See? That's what we're talking about. Law 1, law 2. Ordinarily, parties would select the law that applies to the underlying contract. They would also select the law that applies to the arbitration agreement. When the parties fail to do so, sometimes courts or arbitration tribunals engage in this interesting analysis to come up with a set of laws or a set of rules that would apply to the determination of whether or not the separate arbitration agreement is valid. What they've done in this case is, yes, the underlying contract is subject to Soviet law. Yes, we understand it requires 2 witnesses to test it. Yes, we understand that in this case that did not happen. But it does not mean that we lack jurisdiction, because the source of our jurisdiction is a separate agreement that is subject not to Soviet law, but to the New York Convention. Grounds of invalidity under the New York Convention are limited. It does not include attestation by 2 witnesses. Therefore, we have the jurisdiction to arbitrate the underlying contract. Because that's how they rescued the arbitration agreement, and therefore rescued their own jurisdiction, and of course did not refrain from pronouncing on the validity of the underlying contract itself. Now, here's a question for you. if they did not deny the application of Soviet contract law, and if they did not deny that Soviet contract law required 2 witnesses, and if they did not deny that no 2 witnesses signed this particular agreement, how come that they were able to offer a solution to this problem? If the contract is invalid. They said, yes, we have the jurisdiction to adjudicate whether the contract and that contract is valid or not. But if they recognize the grounds of invalidity under Soviet law, but they were able to offer a solution to this problem. And how did they do that? Huh?
The arbitration agreement is valid because under New York Convention, only mistake, fraud, and so on can lead to an invalid arbitration agreement. So even though the underlying contract is valid under Soviet law, but the arbitration agreement is valid. So the arbitrator can assert jurisdiction on them.
Yes, so they did that. They did that very well. They took it outside of the Soviet contract law. I mean the arbitration contract. They say that it's subject only to the New York Convention rules. They say the New York Convention only recognizes invalidity on the basis of mistake, duress, waiver, or undue influence. Now once they have said that, they have to adjudicate the main substantive claim, which is breach of contract. But the other party, the Moody's party, is saying that there is no breach of contract because there was no contract in the first place, because the contract was not signed by 2 witnesses, and that is a formal requirement under Soviet law. So the contract never existed. So if the contract never existed, in determining the substance of the claim, what did the tribunal do? Did they decide that there was a breach of contract, of an existing contract? What did they say?
But the plaintiff is entitled to a restitution right.
Restitution. That's exactly what they did, right? And restitution is what? Is a contract concept?
No.
It could be. But in this case, it was extra-contractual. Unlawful enrichment of types, which is probably classified as tort law. Right? You're not going to get away with $100 million. One way or another, you have admitted that you've actually taken goods worth $100 million. You may claim that there is no contract. If there is no contract and you have taken someone else's property, there is another law that actually says you have to return it. Now, another question. This one is a bit more complicated. The Soviet party would have preferred a breach of contract finding rather than restitution. Why? They would have preferred, and they in fact did argue, for a finding of breach of contract rather than mere restitution. Why?
Because we also have a profit about 100 million.
Absolutely. So then they would have been entitled to loss of profit. They were denied that money, right? Yeah. So they quantified the damages on the basis of how much that oil was worth at the time it was sold. And they were denied loss of profit. So their argument of a breach of contract or lack of the existence of the underlying contract, they actually succeeded in many ways to avoid $120 million worth of consequential damages of some type or loss of profit. But again, the key is the analysis that the arbitral tribunal engaged in is very interesting. They say the arbitration agreement is subject to a separate law. It's subject to the New York Convention. It's not subject to Soviet law that was part of that. And it's separate. And the grounds of invalidity are narrow. The arbitration agreement is not invalid. Therefore, we have jurisdiction. And on the basis of that jurisdiction, we hold that we owe them restitution and they award the amount of money that was lost. Not the loss of profit, but it was compensatory. And then what happened after that? Was that the end of this case? What did the Bermudez entity do? What did they do with it? They award it. Did they pay? They did not pay. What did they do?
Eradicating the
Go
court.
to the Bermuda court and reject the award of the attribution.
Yeah, they took it to court to get it set aside on the basis of the same kind of argument they made to the judge. And apparently the district court agreed with them. But obviously the higher court, the appellate court, did not agree with the lower court. That's right. That's good. Whether or not they were able to collect their money, I'm not sure. A lot of these companies, they get incorporated in these kinds of offshore locations. They don't keep a lot of money in their bank accounts. They know that if you actually go after them, you could collect the money. It's not very difficult to move money from one location to another and make it look like it doesn't belong to you. They probably did that. And I'd like to talk about my own experience. I had on one occasion won some money out of a company I was incorporated to in Samoa, and we won an award, and we went to get it enforced officially, a significant amount of money. But in that company's account, we only found $26,000. That was it. And we're never able to recover the awards. And I won't be surprised if this Bermudez company didn't have a lot of money in their bank. It's very obvious that some lawyers within that company did not do their work very well. But they actually allowed it to happen. I don't know how you do that in these modern days. I think this was in 1993. Somebody did a poor job of keeping track of things. Okay, now let's take a 10-minute break and come back and